It's my birthday today. Mommy's sick, but she'll still smile if you come to my party, the little girl said, her voice barely louder than the rustle of the maple leaves around them. Ethan Cole sat alone on the park bench, his charcoal coat flawless, his polished shoes catching the pale afternoon light. Yet nothing about him looked complete. His shoulders curved inward, as if shielding a wound the world could not see, and his hand tightened around a paper cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. It had been 6 years to the day. The air in Maple Creek, Colorado, carried the crisp bite of late autumn, the kind that hinted at the first frost yet to come. A low sun hung in the sky, casting golden light through a canopy of maples lining the town's central park. The wind teased loose clusters of dry leaves, sending them tumbling across the cracked pathways. In the distance, the snow-capped peaks of the Rockies stood watch, their icy crowns glinting in the afternoon light. The park, though small, was a refuge for the locals. A few benches scattered under aging trees, a children's play area with fading paint, and the hum of life that seemed to move slower here than in the city beyond. On one of those weathered benches sat Ethan Cole, a man who looked like he had stepped out of a corporate magazine cover, yet there was nothing polished about his posture. In his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, Ethan's dark hair showed the first strands of silver, a reminder of years spent carrying invisible weights. His charcoal gray overcoat was neatly tailored. His black leather shoes still bore a shine from habit, but his shoulders slumped forward, and his hands gripped a lukewarm paper cup of coffee, like it was the only anchor keeping him in the present. Ethan was the kind of man who moved through life with precision, the product of decades in high-stakes business negotiations. But 5 years ago, that certainty had shattered. His wife and young daughter had been taken from him in an accident on a snowy highway, and since then, he had lived more as a ghost than a man. Those who once knew him said he had grown colder, quieter, and they weren't wrong. His visits to the cemetery were the only rituals he kept without fail. Today was one of those days. 6 years to the day since he had last heard his daughter's laughter. At his feet lay Rusty, his constant companion for the past 3 years. A 7-year-old German shepherd, Rusty's once sharp gaze had long since faded into darkness. Blindness had crept in slowly, stealing the light from his amber eyes until all that remained was the soft, clouded sheen beneath his lids. Around his head, tied neatly behind his ears, was an orange blindfold made of soft cloth. Not to hide the eyes in shame, but to let strangers know his world was touched only by sound, scent, and the subtle vibrations of life around him. His sable and black coat was thick, though the fur along his muzzle had begun to gray. Rusty was steady and quiet, the sort of dog whose mere presence calmed a room. To Ethan, he was more than a pet. He was the last living thing in his life he trusted entirely. Ethan sat there in silence, his thoughts wandering when he felt it, the prickling sense of being watched. He glanced up to see a small figure standing a few feet away. Lily Thompson couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Her hair was a tumble of pale blonde curls, unbrushed, but catching the sunlight in a halo of soft gold. She wore a faded blue dress with a hem frayed from too many washes, and her shoes didn't match, one red, one pink. In her small hands, clutched tightly to her chest, was a worn cloth bag decorated with faint star patterns. Her cheeks were smudged, perhaps with chocolate or dirt, but her eyes, bright, curious hazel, were clear and unafraid. "Are you sad too, mister?" she asked, her voice as soft as the breeze stirring the leaves. Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "What makes you think that?" She pointed at him, matter of fact. "Because you're sitting alone, like me." The words hit him harder than they should have. He shifted slightly. "And why are you alone, sweetheart?" Lily's expression grew serious. "It's my birthday today. Mommy's sick, but she'll still smile if you come to my party." Ethan's lips parted in surprise. He had faced boardrooms full of aggressive executives and billion-dollar deals without hesitation. Yet this tiny stranger had disarmed him completely. He glanced around the park, a few children playing in the distance, parents chatting on benches, but no one seemed to be watching her. "I don't think I should intrude," he said carefully, starting to rise. But Lily stepped forward, her small hand reaching out to tug at the sleeve of his coat with surprising firmness. "Please," she whispered, I saved candies from school for this. Ethan looked down into her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he saw something unguarded. There was a seriousness there, far too old for her years. He thought of the last birthday party he had attended, in a hospital room, his daughter too weak to blow out the candles, whispering, "It's okay, Daddy. We can pretend." This little girl was pretending too. He exhaled slowly. "All right then. Lead the way, birthday girl." Lily's face lit up like the first break of sun through storm clouds. Without hesitation, she reached for his hand. Her fingers were cold but steady, and Rusty's ears twitched as if he sensed the change in Ethan's heartbeat. The dog stood, stretching slowly, then fell into step beside them, his head tilted slightly toward the sound of Lily's small voice as she began to chatter. As they walked, she told him about the drawing she made that morning, about how her mommy was resting, about the kids who had gone home already, but how it was still a party because she had her candies. Ethan listened, truly listened, in a way he hadn't in years. The path curved past the park's edge, where rows of aging brick apartment buildings stood in tired silence. A curtain fluttered in a second-story window. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. "That's my home," Lily said, pointing at a building with peeling paint. "Mommy and me live in 2C, and Mr. Jack lives across the hall. He fixes things for everyone. He's old but nice." "Mr. Jack?" Ethan asked. "Uh-huh," she nodded. "He makes wooden birds, and he gave me this." She patted her cloth bag proudly. "Said I should keep it safe." They climbed the front steps. The door groaned as Lily pushed it open. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew and old paint. Rusty's paws clicked softly against the worn linoleum as they began the slow climb up 2 flights of creaky stairs. At the landing, Lily stopped in front of a faded blue door with the number 2C barely clinging to the wood. She looked up at him. "Ready?" Ethan hesitated for just a heartbeat, glancing down at Rusty, who stood still beside him, ears pricked. Then he nodded. "Ready?" Lily knocked twice, gentle taps, then turned the knob and pushed the door open. "Mommy, I brought someone." The door to apartment 2C opened with a slow, tired groan, revealing the scent of age and quiet struggle. The air inside was faintly laced with antiseptic and the warm tang of dust. The small living room was dim, lit only by a single yellow bulb above the sink, flickering in the uneven intervals. The walls bore stains that no amount of scrubbing could erase, and in one corner, a makeshift patch of cardboard sealed a gap in the plaster. The couch, positioned near the lone window, sagged in the middle as if it had weathered years of stories, sorrows, and brief moments of joy. On that couch lay Grace Thompson, her form almost delicate against the threadbare cushions. 28 years old, but worn in a way that made her seem older. Grace had the kind of beauty that wasn't diminished by hardship, but instead made more striking by it. Her hair, a soft blonde dulled slightly by illness, framed a face pale and drawn. There was strength in her cheekbones, and a quiet resilience in the lines at the corners of her eyes. She was of medium height, but in her current state, her frame looked fragile, the weight of each breath a visible effort. A clear nasal cannula fed her air from the portable oxygen tank beside her, its faint hiss the metronome of her days. Life had not been generous to Grace. Years of working long shifts in diners, followed by a diagnosis that stripped away her ability to stand for hours. Yet, despite the circumstances, her eyes carried warmth, even in exhaustion. When she heard her daughter's voice, Grace stirred, her movements slow and careful. She coughed softly, a sound that seemed to rattle all the way from her chest, and turned her head toward the doorway. Her gaze fell on the tall man standing there in a well-cut overcoat, with a German shepherd at his side. Surprise flashed briefly, then instinctive caution. "Mommy, this is..." Lily's voice trailed off as she glanced up at Ethan. "What's your name again?" "Ethan," he supplied gently. "This is Ethan. He came from my party," Lily announced, with the kind of pride reserved for the rarest of guests. Grace's brow furrowed, her eyes narrowing slightly as she glanced from Ethan to her daughter. "You came with her?" "She found me in the park," Ethan replied, stepping into the room slowly, careful not to intrude too far. "Said it was her birthday?" Lily was already busy moving about the small space, pulling a folding table toward the couch. Rusty, sensing the shift in energy, walked forward until his nose was almost level with Grace's hand. His fur brushed lightly against her fingers, and instinctively, she let them trail over the top of his head. She noticed the soft fabric of the orange blindfold and realized the dog's clouded eyes were unseeing. He leaned gently into her touch, a quiet warmth in an otherwise fragile room. "I didn't expect guests," Grace murmured, her voice tinged with apology. "Neither did I," Ethan admitted, managing a faint smile. "But your daughter is persuasive." Grace's lips curved just slightly, the smallest shadow of amusement before fatigue reclaimed her features. From her cloth bag, Lily began producing treasures. 3 pieces of wrapped candy, 1 red, 1 green, 1 blue. She set them in the center of the folding table, as if unveiling a feast. "I saved these all week, just for my party," she declared. Ethan watched, something deep and old in him shifting. "That's impressive," he said sincerely. Lily looked around the room, her brow knitting. "We don't have candles." Without thinking too long, Ethan reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a small metal lighter. Well worn, initials faint, but still there. He glanced toward the kitchen, spotted a small piece of foil from a food wrapper, and with a practiced hand, fashioned a makeshift candle by shaping the foil into a tiny cup. From his other pocket, he found a stub of colored crayon that Lily had likely dropped earlier. He pressed the crayon into the foil, the wax stub standing upright. "Now," he said, placing it in front of her, "it's a real birthday." Grace's eyes softened, watching him. She didn't know this man, didn't understand why he had said yes to her daughter, but in that moment, she was grateful. Ethan flicked the lighter, shielding the flame from the small draft that seeped through the window. The wax caught, a tiny flame dancing at the center of their modest celebration. Lily clapped her hands, eyes wide. "Make a wish, birthday girl," Ethan prompted. Lily closed her eyes tightly, her hands pressed together under her chin. She whispered something so quietly that only she could hear it, then blew out the flame. The room felt warmer, as if her joy had lit something unseen. They shared the candies, Ethan politely taking only a small piece, Grace refusing entirely, but smiling as Lily insisted on feeding Rusty a dog treat from a small tin. Rusty accepted it with a slow wag of his tail, resting afterward at Grace's feet like a sentinel who had found a post worth guarding. Minutes passed in easy quiet, the kind that didn't demand words. Eventually, Ethan rose, sensing it was time to leave. Lily followed him to the door, clutching her cloth bag. Grace gave him a polite nod, still cautious but softer than before. In the dim hallway outside, the smell of old wood and faint mildew returned. Ethan turned toward the stairs, but before he could take a step, a voice called from down the corridor. "You the guy she brought home?" Ethan looked over to see Jack Miller, a man in his late 60s, standing in the doorway of the apartment across the hall. Jack was tall but stooped with age, his frame wiry, his skin weathered by years of work outdoors. His white hair was cropped short under a faded cap, and his hands bore the permanent calluses of a craftsman. He wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled too, the elbows in jeans that had seen better days. There was an alertness in his pale blue eyes, the kind of watchfulness born from both care and suspicion. "That's me," Ethan replied. Jack stepped into the hallway, leaning slightly on the doorframe. "Name's Jack. I look out for Grace and Lily when I can. Fix a leaky pipe here, mend a door there." His voice was even, but there was a guarded edge. "You should know. This building won't be here much longer. Some big real estate outfit's buying the block. Folks will be out before winter's done." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "Which company?" Jack gave a humorless chuckle. "Crane Holdings. You've probably heard of them." The name hit like a blow. Crane Holdings wasn't just a company Ethan had heard of, it was his. Jack didn't miss the flicker in Ethan's expression. "Didn't think you'd be the type to care. Most folks in those offices don't." Ethan swallowed hard, his mind already spinning. "Maybe you'd be surprised," he said quietly. Jack gave him a long look, then nodded once and retreated into his apartment, the door closing with a soft click. Ethan stood there for a moment, the weight of the hallway pressing in on him. Rusty shifted beside him, head tilted as if sensing the unease in his voice. Without another word, they descended the stairs, stepping back into the crisp autumn air. The wind swept down from the Rockies that night, carrying with it the bitter bite of approaching winter. In Maple Creek, the temperature had fallen sharply after sunset, and by the time the last street lamp blinked on, the neighborhood surrounding the old brick apartment building was plunged into a deep, sudden darkness. A power outage rolled across the block without warning, swallowing the hallways and rooms in silence broken only by the occasional clink of pipes cooling in the cold. Ethan stood by his car at the curb, Rusty at his side, the dog's ears flicking at each sound in the night. Rusty's orange blindfold caught the light from the street lamp, and his breath puffed faint clouds into the air. The 7-year-old German shepherd was calm, waiting for Ethan's next move, his tail swaying once as if sensing purpose. Ethan's hand lingered on the car door before pulling out a canvas tote from the passenger seat. Inside were 2 thermoses, a small loaf of bread from a bakery on Main Street, and a pack of shortbread cookies. In his other hand, he held a heavy flashlight, the kind that could cut through shadows with a solid, unwavering beam. Crossing the street, Ethan climbed the building's front steps. His shoes tapped softly against the wood, and the smell of old varnish rose from the banister as he gripped it. Rusty kept close, brushing against his leg as they moved carefully up the stairs. When they reached 2C, Ethan knocked gently. The door opened partway to reveal Lily, her small frame silhouetted by the faint glow of a candle set on the floor. Her pale blonde curls were more tangled than the day before, and she wore a long-sleeved shirt, patterned with faded stars, slightly too big for her. "You came," she said, her voice almost conspiratorial, as though the darkness had made her a keeper of secrets. "I said I would," Ethan replied with a small smile, stepping inside. Grace was propped up on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The flickering candlelight caught in her hair, softening the hollows beneath her cheekbones. She managed a tired smile. "I hope you didn't come just to freeze with us." "I brought supplies," Ethan said, holding up the tote. Rusty padded into the room, immediately settling in the middle of the rug. His nose twitched at the unfamiliar scents, but he remained still, his presence like a steadying weight. Lily bounced onto the couch beside her mother, her small hands reaching for the thermos. "Is this tea?" "Hot water," Ethan corrected gently, unscrewing the lid. "We can make tea with what you have." Grace chuckled softly. "That's generous for this place." She shifted the blanket more snugly around Lily before looking back at Ethan. "What made you come back?" Before he could answer, a knock sounded on the open doorframe. It was Jack Miller, holding a thin folder under his arm. The dim candlelight revealed the deep creases in his face, the slightly stooped way he stood, from years bent over woodworking tables. His plaid shirt sleeves were rolled high, revealing forearms still strong despite his age. "Thought I'd bring this up while the lights are out," he said, stepping inside without ceremony. Grace shot him a knowing look. "Jack, not tonight." "It matters," Jack interrupted, setting the folder down on the table near Ethan. "You should see this." Ethan reached for it, flipping the cover open. Inside were a handful of typed notices, some printed emails, and an official letter stamped with a logo he knew all too well, Crane Holdings. Each page detailed plans to acquire the building and surrounding lots for redevelopment. There were eviction timelines, projected demolition dates, and phrases like relocation incentives that, in his world, translated to a polite shove out the door. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Where did you get these?" Jack shrugged. "A friend at City Hall. You're looking at your own company's plans." His gaze was sharp, testing. "That means you can stop it." Grace's brow furrowed, her eyes moving from Jack to Ethan. "Is that true?" Ethan hesitated, the weight of both their stares pressing into him. "Yes," he admitted, his voice low. "It's true." The room fell quiet, except for the soft tick of the candle's flame. Rusty shifted, laying his head across his front paws, his blindfold casting a small shadow on the rug. Lily broke the silence with the certainty only a child could muster. "We can have a story now." It was the simplest of requests, but it cut through the tension like a warm knife. Grace exhaled, leaning back into the couch. Ethan closed the folder and set it aside, the decision about what to do with it postponed, at least for the length of a story. "Who starts?" Grace asked, her voice softer now. "I will," Ethan offered. He settled onto the rug beside Rusty, the dog instinctively shifting so that his body touched both Ethan's leg and the edge of Lily's blanket. It was as if Rusty, without sight, could sense the invisible threads connecting them all. Ethan began, weaving a tale about a lantern that could only be lit by kindness. Grace added her own twist, a mountain that guarded the lantern from those who would use it selfishly. Lily's laughter bubbled up when she added that the lantern's guardian was a very stubborn bird who only spoke in riddles. Rusty lay still, the steady rhythm of his breathing a quiet backdrop to their words. The story grew in the dim light, each voice adding to the next, until even Jack, still lingering near the door, offered a line about how the lantern could banish the cold from any home. When the story ended, the room felt warmer, though the power had not yet returned. Grace's eyes had softened, the tension from moments before tucked away, if only temporarily. Lily had curled into her mother's side, her eyes drifting shut, still clutching the edge of the blanket. Ethan rose quietly, picking up the flashlight and switching it on. "I'll get out of your way," he said to Grace. She nodded, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer than before. "Thank you for coming." Jack stepped into the hallway with Ethan, lowering his voice. "I'm serious about that folder. These people, your people, will clear us out without looking back." Ethan tightened his grip on the flashlight. "I know," he said simply, and walked toward the stairs, Rusty pacing at his side. Morning broke in Maple Creek under a sky the color of pewter, the kind that carried no promise of warmth. A cold wind threaded through the narrow streets, rattling the last stubborn leaves clinging to the trees. Ethan's phone vibrated on his desk just as he was settling into the quiet of his study. The voice on the other end was urgent, Jack Miller, his tone clipped and unsteady. "It's Grace. She's bad off. Ambulance just left." Ethan didn't remember ending the call. In less than 5 minutes, he was out the door, Rusty at his side, the dog sensing the shift in his handler's mood. They drove through the frost-tipped streets, tires hissing against the damp asphalt. At the Maple Creek Community Hospital, Ethan left Rusty in the car with the windows cracked just enough for the cold air to keep him alert. "I'll be quick," he murmured, running a hand over Rusty's head before striding inside. The hospital's ER was all fluorescent glare and antiseptic scent. Behind the triage desk sat Nurse Amelia Torres, a woman in her early 40s with walnut-brown skin and thick black hair pinned into a tidy bun. She had the kind of presence that could silence a room without raising her voice, her eyes sharp yet kind. Years in emergency care had etched faint lines into her face, each one a story of lives saved and lost. "Grace Thompson?" Ethan asked, his voice tighter than he expected. Amelia's gaze swept over him, taking in his pressed coat, the hint of corporate polish. "Family?" she asked. "A friend," he said, though the word felt inadequate. "She's stable for now. You can see her, but only for a few minutes." Amelia led him down a narrow hallway where the hum of machines replaced the chatter of the waiting room. Grace lay in a curtained-off bay, her blonde hair spread like pale silk against the white pillow. Her skin had taken on a translucent quality, and her breathing, though steady, seemed to cost her something with each rise and fall of her chest. An IV line ran into her arm, and the oxygen tube was back in place. Even in this fragile state, there was a faint dignity in how she rested, one hand curled loosely on the blanket. Ethan pulled a chair close to the bed. For a moment, he said nothing, simply watching her breathe, the monitors keeping time. When her eyes fluttered open, confusion flickered across her face before recognition set in. "You came," she whispered. "Of course I came," he said, leaning forward. "You didn't have to," she murmured, her voice dry. "Some things you don't have to think about," he replied. "You just do them." A faint smile ghosted her lips, but she closed her eyes again, too tired to hold the moment. Ethan stayed, letting the minutes slip past, his hand resting lightly on the bed's railing. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about quarterly reports or investor calls. He was thinking about a girl with mismatched shoes, a woman fighting for breath, and an orange blindfolded dog waiting outside. Later that afternoon, Ethan drove back to the building. Jack was waiting at the entrance, Lily standing beside him in her oversized starry shirt and patched jeans. Rusty moved straight to her, his nose brushing her hands, the dog settling at her side like a guardian who understood her better than words could. "She hasn't left his side since you brought him around," Jack said quietly, watching Lily crouch to press her cheek against Rusty's neck. Ethan knelt to Lily's height. "Your mom's resting at the hospital," he told her gently. "I'll visit her again tonight." Lily nodded, her hazel eyes shadowed but calm, one hand still tangled in Rusty's fur. Jack cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about what you saw in that folder. You're not the kind of man to just walk away, are you?" Ethan looked him squarely in the eye. "Number. And I've already made the call." That evening, in the corner office of Crane Holdings, Ethan sat across from his executive team. The skyline glittered through the glass walls, but his gaze was steady on the faces before him. "The Maple Creek redevelopment project," he began, "is paused indefinitely. No further action until we review the human impact. No evictions, no demolition." One of the senior VPs, a lean man in his 50s named Charles Benton, bristled. "With respect, sir, the financial loss—" Ethan cut him off. "We're not in the business of destroying communities to make a spreadsheet look better." His tone left no room for argument. By the next morning, word had trickled back to Maple Creek. Jack intercepted Ethan outside 2C. His usual guardedness softened. "Heard the news," Jack said simply. "Didn't think I'd say this, but you've got my thanks." Ethan glanced past him to where Lily sat, cross-legged in the hallway. Rusty stretched out beside her. The dog's head rested on her lap, his tail thumping softly against the floor. "You don't need to thank me," Ethan said. "Some things just have to be done." For the first time since they'd met, Jack's expression eased into something like trust. "Then maybe you're not like the rest of them after all." That night, Ethan returned to the hospital. Grace was sleeping, but her hand found his when he sat down. He stayed until the nurse gently reminded him visiting hours were over. Walking out into the chill night air, he realized the battle he'd fought that day hadn't been in the boardroom. It had been in himself, between the man who built walls to survive and the man who was learning how to take them down. Winter had passed gently that year, as if Maple Creek itself had decided the town had seen enough struggle for a while. By early spring, the park was waking from its long slumber. Grass pushed through the soil in tender green blades, and the maples wore the first blush of fresh leaves. The air still carried a crispness, but the sun was warm enough to invite people out of their apartments. On this particular afternoon, laughter and the faint scent of frosting drifted across the open space near the old fountain. Ethan stood by a picnic table under one of the larger maple trees, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, setting down a cake box with deliberate care. He looked different than the man who had once sat alone in this park months ago. The gray in his hair was still there, but his shoulders no longer slumped under invisible weight. His expression was easier now, a quiet contentment resting in the corners of his mouth. The cake was simple yet beautiful. White frosting smoothed with practiced hands, topped with pink sugar flowers and 4 bright candles waiting to be lit. He'd ordered it from a local baker, Martha Jenkins, a cheerful woman in her 50s with round cheeks and flour-dusted hair, who had insisted on adding the flowers for the little lady. Martha herself had stopped by earlier to drop it off, clasping Ethan's hand in both of hers and telling him, "I've never seen Jack smile the way he has lately. You've done something good here, Mr. Cole." Lily was already in the park, darting between benches in a pale yellow dress that caught the light whenever she spun. Her mismatched shoes had been replaced with a pair of white sandals, though she still wore them loosely, her own stubborn preference. She'd grown since the day they met, a little taller, a little surer, but her laughter had the same bright ring. Rusty sat near the table, the orange blindfold tied neatly, his ears twitching every time Lily's voice floated his way. Though blind, he seemed to track her movements with an almost uncanny awareness, his tail giving small, steady thumps against the grass. The 7-year-old German shepherd looked well kept now, his sable and black coat brushed to a soft sheen. Grace arrived a few minutes later, walking slowly but steadily, her hair in loose waves brushing her shoulders. She wore a soft blue cardigan over a light dress, and though there was still a fragility to her frame, her cheeks held color again. The oxygen tank was gone, and with it, the thin plastic tubing that had once trailed constantly from her nose. She smiled as she saw the cake, her eyes brightening in a way that made the months of recovery worth every step. Jack Miller followed behind her, carrying a folding chair in one hand. He wore a clean flannel shirt tucked into his jeans, his old cap perched at a comfortable tilt. His frame was still lean, his gait a little stiff from age, but his expression was easier now. The deep furrows in his brow had softened, replaced by a look of quiet pride. By the time everyone gathered around, a few other residents from the building had drifted in, bringing paper plates, lemonade, and the kind of easy chatter that had been missing from the block for too long. Mrs. Alvarez from the third floor, tall and wiry with silver hair pulled into a bun, brought a basket of homemade rolls. Mr. Harris from the corner unit, a quiet man in his 70s with large hands and a gentle voice, brought a bouquet of tulips for Grace. When Ethan lit the candles, the group fell into a comfortable hush. The small flames flickered in the mild breeze, their glow mirrored in Lily's hazel eyes. She leaned closer to Ethan and, just before taking a breath, whispered so only he could hear, "You were my first candle." For a moment he froze, the words pulling at something deep inside. Then he smiled, genuine, unguarded, and whispered back, "And you were my first light." Lily blew out the candles in one determined puff, and the crowd clapped, their cheers spilling into laughter. Grace leaned into Ethan's shoulder briefly, her hand brushing his in a quiet, wordless thank you. Rusty stayed seated, head slightly tilted as though listening to every sound, his tail tapping the grass in slow rhythm. Ethan knelt to scratch behind his ears. "You knew all along, didn't you, boy?" Rusty gave a small huff, leaning into the touch. Plates of cake were passed around. Jack took a seat next to Ethan, chewing thoughtfully before saying, "Word's gone around about what you did for this building. People won't forget it." "I didn't do it for thanks," Ethan said simply. Jack studied him for a moment, then nodded. "That's why it matters." Across the table, Mrs. Alvarez was laughing with Grace, and Mr. Harris was showing Lily how to fold tulip petals just right for a bouquet. The sight stirred something in Ethan, the realization that this wasn't just a birthday party. It was a small victory for a community that had almost been scattered, a quiet moment that proved what could be saved if someone cared enough. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting the park in a golden haze, Ethan gathered Lily into his arms. "Did you make a wish?" he asked. She nodded solemnly. "Want to tell me what it was?" Leaning in close, she whispered, "I wished we could stay like this forever." Ethan kissed her forehead. "We already are." Grace stepped forward then, wrapping her arms around both of them. Jack stood nearby, one hand resting on Rusty's back. Around them, the laughter of neighbors mixed with the rustle of the maple leaves, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Sometimes, the greatest miracles are not loud or dramatic. They are found in the quiet moments when a heart chooses love over convenience, compassion over indifference. Perhaps it was no accident that Ethan sat on that bench the day Lily found him. Perhaps God placed them in each other's path so that healing could begin for all of them. In our own lives, we may pass by someone who is silently praying for a light, a kindness, a reason to keep going. Be that light. Be that kindness. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to tell us your thoughts, subscribe to our channel so you never miss another story of faith, love, and second chances. And join us in praying for blessings over everyone watching right now. If you believe in the power of God's timing, type Amen in the comments and let this be your prayer. May God bless you and keep you always.